Warning: this episode contains the use of a word that, in some contexts, can be used as a slur against the gay community. There will be a further warning just before and a timestamp provided for you to skip ahead to avoid it should you wish to do so. When one thinks of children, we usually associate them with innocence and purity, a shining beacon of wholesome values and a trusting, loving nature. But sadly, this is not always the case. Every once in a while, there emerges a child that, for whatever reason, has their wiring so irrevocably screwed up that the result is unadulterated evil incarnate. More Wednesday Addams than Shirley Temple. The topic of today's video is one of those rarities. A little girl with a streak of psychopathy that no one could ever have imagined would become one of Britain's youngest ever killers. So join us as Descent into Darkness explores the crimes of a killer kid, Mary Bell. An early life of crime. Born on the 26th of May 1957, Mary Flora Bell grew up in the Scotswood area of Newcastle upon Tyne in northeast England at number 70 White House Road. Her mother, Elizabeth, or Betty as she preferred to be known, only 17 at the time of Mary's birth, was a prostitute specializing in BDSM, who regularly travelled to Glasgow to meet regular clients. Naturally, this should have meant that young Mary would be in the care of her dad, William Bell, but he was often absent from the home. If indeed he was her biological father at all, there has certainly been debate down the years. It is known that William was a violent drunk who had a string of arrests hanging over his name for various booze-fueled crimes, and even one for armed robbery. Betty is said to have deeply resented her daughter's existence, even reportedly, according to Betty's sister, Isa McCricket, telling the nurse who tried to place the newly born Mary into her arms to, quote, "get that thing away from me." Charming lady. However, criminologist Professor David Wilson posited that Betty was something of an attention seeker and may well have used Mary to this end by way of deliberately injuring her daughter or inducing illness to garner medical attention, a condition known as Munchausen syndrome by proxy. As you can see, this is a highly unstable and broken environment in which to raise a child, and it is little wonder that Mary would not develop mentally in the correct manner. Betty is known to have attempted to administer an overdose to her child in the form of sleeping pills, whilst on another occasion she deliberately dropped Mary from a first-floor window, only for her to survive both of these attempts. Perhaps these incidents of attempted infanticide could be attributed to severe postnatal depression, but this is only one possible explanation. Maybe she was just an arsehole. Who knows? To have a child grow up in such conditions is beyond disgraceful. Made even worse by Betty repeatedly refusing various offers to take Mary in and raise her. If she didn't want Mary in the first place, why would she refuse the offer of foster care? It truly baffles the mind. And yet, on another occasion, Betty was seen talking to an older woman who lamented the fact that she was too old to adopt, only for Betty to straight up offer her daughter to this woman and say, "Here, take this one." However, it has been alleged that Betty disgustingly used her own daughter as an extra service for her clients to further abuse, forcing her to perform various acts by the mid-1960s as Mary was closing in on double-digit age. Allegedly, she would be bound and blindfolded with stockings or tights before these acts took place. As she grew, various signs of mental instability began to manifest. She was a chronic bedwetter, which can be an indicator of abuse, although not exclusively, and she was prone to sudden violent outbursts and rapid, unpredictable changes in mood. At school, she would frequently instigate fights with her fellow pupils, both male and female. Most chillingly, she had a propensity to attempt to strangle and suffocate whomever she fought with, even stuffing sand into one girl's throat. Unsurprisingly, this meant that Mary didn't have many friends with all the other kids, giving her a wide berth, quickly figuring out her tells of when she was likely to attack someone in the form of a long, unwavering stare. However, she would find one companion, the daughter of the next-door neighbour, Norma Joyce Bell, no relation, who was 2 years older than Mary. The two Bells would regularly knock about together around the local area, looking for something to entertain themselves with. This would usually be in the form of petty vandalism, but sadly for the local children, they would soon find themselves the target for a devilish duo. But even before this, the pair were caught on the wrong side of the law on more than one occasion. Their first convictions came when they were caught stealing the money out of a coin-driven gas meter of a tenement block. They both pled guilty to the offence of larceny, but as this was their first offence, and because they were both under 16, they were conditionally discharged. The first sign of severe escalation of Mary's behaviour came on the 11th of May 1968, when she was 10 years old. Both Mary and Norma attacked a 3-year-old boy named John Best, who was a cousin of Mary's, somewhere around the area of St Margaret's Road, luring him to follow them up onto a roof of a disused World War II air raid shelter, before shoving him off the roof to a 7-foot drop below, leaving him with a head injury that poured with blood. The wee lad was later found dazed, grazed, bleeding and crying inconsolably when both Mary and Norma took him to get help from the adults of a nearby pub. Little John Best was later questioned by police, but he did not say that he had been pushed, and the girls claimed that they had found him like that. Nevertheless, the police suspected there was more to the story than they were being told, but with no further evidence, they were forced to label the incident as accidental. Later, the very next day, the police received calls from 3 sets of parents complaining that 2 girls had been playing with their children at a local sandpit, and then they had suddenly attacked their children, trying to throttle them all. One of the children, Pauline Watson, had visible abrasion marks around her throat. Norma commented on this incident to the police thusly, quote, "Mary went to one of the girls and said, 'What happens if you choke someone? Do they die?' Then Mary put both hands round the girl's throat and squeezed. The girl started to go purple. I told Mary to stop, but she wouldn't. Then she put her hands around Pauline's throat, and she started going purple as well. Another girl, Susan Cornish, came up, and Mary did the same thing to her." When interviewed by the police, Mary denied any involvement in the attacks on the 3 other kids. The coppers weren't convinced, but because they were both so young, they were given a formal police caution, in essence, a severe warning, and the incident was passed on to the local authority's Social Services Department, an authority that dealt extensively with both families on a regular basis. Murders. As with so many other places up and down Britain in the 1960s, there was widespread clearances of many dilapidated buildings of the Victorian era and areas damaged or abandoned following the Second World War, replacing them with new buildings, houses and factories. That being said, economic downturn and rising poverty and unemployment plagued vast swathes of Britain's towns and cities, and Scotswood area of Newcastle was certainly no exception, having one of the highest rates of crime and alcoholism in the whole country. It was highly common for the children of the time to be out of the house for many hours on end with zero oversight. Very often, parents would not bother to go looking for their kids, instead relying on the closeness of the community to look out for them and report any sightings back. This controlled destruction and lack of proper supervision and discipline provided a large, quote, playground for children in the days when health and safety were not even a thing. Mary and Norma were too to take advantage of the numerous hiding places that were popping up everywhere, with lots of bricks and rubble to throw around, causing even more damage. But Mary's psychopathy was now simmering below the surface, and it would not be long before another child would fall victim to her. Only this time, she would have the isolation to see out her murderous inquisitiveness. On the 25th of May 1968, only a couple of weeks after the attacks on the other children and the day before her 11th birthday, Mary Bell lured away a 4-year-old boy named Martin Brown to a derelict house on St Margaret's Road, number 85. She took Martin into one of the former bedrooms upstairs, where she attacked the young boy. It is not known if Norma was present at this incident. Mary killed Martin Brown and then left him there, fleeing the scene. Martin's body was discovered at around 15:30 that same day by another group of 3 children, who ran to find an adult. Very soon, they returned with two men named Gordon Collinson and John Hall, who attempted to revive the boy with CPR, whilst Collinson ran to the nearest phone box to call for an ambulance. Martin's mother lived close by and had heard of the discovery of her boy and had run over to the abandoned house to help John Hall's efforts, but, tragically, it was all to no avail. At this point, as if on cue, both Mary and Norma poked their heads around the door, watching Hall's attempts to bring the boy round. But when he saw them both staring, he sternly ordered them to go away. Instead, the pair decided to head for the house of Martin's aunt, a woman named Rita Finley, whom they knew. Mary knocked on the door. When it was answered by Rita, the two girls said to her, quote, "One of your sister's bairns," meaning children, "has just had an accident. We think it's Martin, but we can't tell because there's blood all over him." The resultant post-mortem was unable to find any other signs of violence and could not determine a cause of death, despite the girls' assertions of there being blood all over him, which there was not. This is highly strange, but it is entirely possible that Martin could have been poisoned in some way. Certainly, an empty pill bottle was found in the same room as the boy, and the police suspected that Martin's mother was the owner of these pills, but this was never established. Although this is highly unusual for someone as violent as Mary to change to a much more detached method of poisoning, the two personality types are quite apart from each other, but that doesn't mean it is not possible, especially when Mary herself had been hospitalized for having been forced to take sleeping pills herself. Perhaps she was venting her anger at her own treatment by her mother, but certainly an interesting point to draw that I welcome debate over in the comments. The coroner's inquest into Martin Brown's death, held on the 7th of June, recorded an open verdict. The very next day, on Mary's 11th birthday, both her and Norma decided to break into a local nursery and vandalise it. They managed to climb onto the roof of the building on Woodland Crescent and gain access by removing some of the slates from the roof and dropping through to the inside. Once in, they proceeded to wreck the place, upending chairs, tables, strewing contents of cupboards all over. Mary took out a marker and proceeded to write rather illegibly on the wall. In quoting what she wrote, I shall be using a particular slur beginning with F used to pejoratively refer to gay people. However, it can also refer to a foodstuff widely available in the north of England that are basically spiced meatballs. As I recall, they tasted absolutely vile, but there you go. So this is your warning about that word. I will put a timestamp should you wish to skip ahead and avoid this part if it offends you. No judgment, of course. I'll see you in a sec. Variously across multiple surfaces, she wrote, quote, "I murder so that I may come back. We did murder Martine Brown. Fuck off, you bastard. Futch off, we murder. Watch out, Fanny and faggot. You are mice. Why? Because we murdered Martine. Go Brown. You better look out. There are murders about by Fanny and old faggot, you screws." As you can see, Mary and Norma's spelling leaves a lot to be desired, but then mindless vandalism is just that. Mindless. When the staff of the nursery arrived the next morning, they were greeted by an absolute bomb site left behind by the two girls. These vile behaviours were written off as children messing around and fantasizing, if you can believe such a ridiculous reaction. Mary had also drawn pictures in her diary depicting Martin's death, even outright pointing towards the probable cause of death by including tablets in the drawing labelled as such. The nursery quickly had an alarm system fitted to the building, which served them well, as it went off when the two attempted to break in a second time, scaring them away. At this stage, though, it was not known that it was Mary and Norma who had broken into the building. 2 days after this, both girls played a sick prank on Martin Brown's mother. Martin's funeral was to be held that day, and they both called round and asked to see Martin. His grieving mother explained that they couldn't see him because he was dead. Mary replied coldly, "Oh, I know he's dead. I want to see him in his coffin." This illustrates the sick indifference toward her fellow man, as their morbid curiosity was only interested in seeing a dead body which Mary had created. Perhaps she wanted to relive the moment, or she just genuinely wanted to see the results of her crime. Or was the idea to openly taunt the mother of her victim? Whichever way, What she said to Martin's mum is beyond sickening and devoid of any sympathy for her loss, a classic sign of psychopathy, the inability to feel emotion or experience empathy for a fellow creature. Mary even attended a local protest about the conditions of the derelict houses where she had murdered Martin Brown. She is seen in this picture on the right-hand side of the image, holding up a banner decrying the decaying buildings. Was she pressured into it by her oft-absent parents, or was she attempting to hide in plain sight? Mary Bell's murderous ways were not over yet, though. On the 31st of July 1968, another 3-year-old boy named Brian Howe had been befriended by Mary and Norma. His parents last saw him playing outside with the 2 girls, one of his siblings, and the family dog, but very soon after, he disappeared. When he failed to return home, his mum and concerned neighbours decided to contact the police to report him missing. In a great display of community, a search party was mounted to try and find little Brian Howe. His elder sister, Pat, was one of those searching. She had even asked Mary and Norma if they had seen Brian. They replied that they had seen him playing on the Tin Lizzie, a local name for a patch of waste ground. Pat replied that he couldn't have been there as he knows not to play over that area. But sadly, at around 23:11 hours, the worst news came through. They had found Brian on the Tin Lizzie patch of ground, but he was dead. He had cuts on his face, blood-coloured foam oozing from the side of his mouth. One of the first officers on the scene was Detective Peter Moore, the same copper who had caught the 2 girls months earlier for stealing from the gas meter. His body was found in between 2 large concrete blocks with handfuls of grass and other pulled-up plants in a pathetic attempt to conceal it. A pair of broken scissors lay on the floor close to the body, and there were many bruises, abrasions and scratch marks all over him, and his lips were blue, suggesting strangulation. Indeed, that was the conclusion of the coroner's inquest, with the medical evidence estimating the time of death at around 7.5 hours before he was found. Several dark red and grey fibres were found on his body that did not match anything in Brian's home, so must have come from his killer, or killers. Numerous stab wounds were found on his legs, his genitals had been mutilated, there had been an attempt to carve a letter M into his belly, clumps of his hair had also been cut off. The police wasted 0 time in their inquiry. During the first 24 hours alone, they had questioned over 1,200 people, including children in the local area, displaying a huge devotion of manpower and resources, as one should expect from such an horrific discovery. This time, the police suspected that, given it was so soon after the death of Martin Brown, that there must be something to the story. During their inquiries, inevitably, 2 names kept repeatedly cropping up: Mary and Norma Bell. During Brian Howe's funeral, Mary had been spotted by Chief Superintendent Dobson, who was leading the case and attending as a representative of the Tyneside force. He noticed that she was hanging around near the church, watching the proceedings, and appeared to be grinning and chuckling to herself as she saw the coffin pass by. This piqued his interest in the way only a copper's intuition can. Mary Bell was firmly on the radar, and it was decided to haul her in before anything further could happen. Both Mary and Norma were brought in for further questioning over the events of the day of Brian Howe's murder. They had already altered their statements on 2 separate occasions, and there was reasonable enough suspicion to have them charged. Trial and imprisonment. In the first recorded instance of 2 children being tried for murder of other children in Britain, the trial of Mary Bell and Norma Bell opened on the 5th of December 1968 at the Assizes in Newcastle. The girls had separate barristers representing them. Mary was defended by Harvey Robson QC and Norma by R.P. Smith QC. Mr. Justice Cusack presided over the proceedings, who decided against granting anonymity for the 2 girls, and so their names and photos were plastered all over the press. The prosecution was led by Rudolph Lyons QC, who, in his 6-hour-long opening statement, informed the jury that they were in for disturbing and sickening slew of evidence, given the tender ages of both victims and alleged perpetrators. He explained that, despite Norma being the elder of the 2, Mary was, by far, the dominant character of the duo. He said that their crimes were, quote, solely for the pleasure and excitement of murder. He further added, quote, both girls knew well what they did was wrong, and what the results would be. Norma's defense hinged on the fact that she did not partake in the acts of murder, although she did admit under cross-examination that she was fully aware of Mary's penchant for a spot of the old ultra-violence, and if you get that reference, we are now friends. Furthermore, she told the court that the two of them had discussed attacking and killing other children, and that Mary had explained how a murder could be committed. She replied to questions on the killing of Brian Howe, quote, "I did not know what was going to happen in the first place. She had stopped hurting him for a bit when the boys were near to the concrete blocks." But she reiterated that she personally never laid hands on either of the victims. When Mary took to the stand in her own defense, she remained there for around 4 hours, with one adjournment granted when she started crying and threw herself into the arms of the policewoman escorting her. I can't help think that these must have been crocodile tears, but the optimist in me hopes that it was the weight of the situation had finally struck her. Feel free to add your own opinions in the comments. She refuted Norma's assertions of Mary being the one who committed the murders and that they had gone to Martin Brown's mother's house because they were, quote, daring each other and one of us did not want to be chicken. When the questions turned to the killing of Brian Howe, she tried to pin it on Norma, saying that she, quote, was just standing and looking. I couldn't move. It was as if some glue was pulling us down. And that Norma had encouraged the boy to lie on the ground for a reward. Quote, you've got to lie down for the lady to come with the sweets. This was, Mary alleged, the point at which Norma had begun the attack, strangling the boy with such force that her fingers were turning white. She said that she had not gone to the authorities herself out of loyalty to her friend. However, the true nature of Mary Bell's character came out when Norma's mother, Catherine, was called to the stand. She testified that some months prior, her husband had caught Mary attempting to strangle Norma's younger sister, Susan. What was worse, she only released her grip after he had struck Mary hard in the shoulder. A child psychiatrist was called on behalf of Norma's defense, who reported that her mental age was lower than her physical one, estimating her to have the mental capacity of an 8-year-old, and that her ability to distinguish right from wrong was diminished, but she would still be able to know that the acts the pair had committed were criminal in nature. The vandalism of the nursery was brought up, and it was shown by the prosecution that the handwriting of both girls matched the graffiti on the walls of the building, with both seemingly writing halves of some words each, with the other finishing off the other half of the word, showing the two distinct writing styles of the same word. During the closing remarks, R.P. Smith, on behalf of Norma, stated that, although both girls were on trial for both crimes, there was no solid evidence against his client, only the conjecture of Mary's accusations, which could easily be to deflect blame from herself. He called upon the jury to put their feelings of outrage at the crimes aside and to consider whether it was morally correct to punish both girls for the actions of only one of them. Mary's brief, Harvey Robson, highlighted her broken home environment and lack of constant reliable role models, and recalled the testimony of a child psychiatrist, David Westbury, who stated that, in his professional opinion, Mary Bell was suffering from severe personality disorder coupled to her upbringing, which had impaired her ability to accept responsibility for her actions, and that her perception of right and wrong were consequently skewed. Their vandalization of the nursery was framed by Robson as a cry for attention, an outlet that screams, "Look at me, I'm so clever and dangerous." Rudolph Lyons of the prosecution conceded that Norma's guilt was not nearly as clear-cut as Mary's, saying, quote, "I forecast to you that the younger girl, although 2 years and 2 months younger than the other, was nevertheless the cleverer and more dominating personality." He highlighted Mary's lies and her cynical attempts to shift blame away from herself, even if that meant throwing her erstwhile friend under the proverbial bus, demonstrating her lack of empathy and a streak of cunning that, unfortunately for her, wasn't quite developed enough to pull the wool over everyone's eyes. The jury returned a verdict. Norma was found not guilty, but would be released under psychiatric supervision. Mary was found not guilty of murder, but the jury agreed that she was guilty of 2 counts of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility due to her various mental problems. When the verdicts were read out, Mary burst into floods of tears, as did her mother and grandmother who were present in the public gallery. By contrast, Norma was ecstatic, cheering and clapping her hands enthusiastically at the news of her vindication. In his sentencing remarks, Mr. Justice Cusack described Mary Bell as an acutely dangerous individual, and that every step should be taken to protect the public from her, stating that she was a grave risk to other children. Because of her age, Mary was sentenced to be detained until Her Majesty's pleasure be known, in other words, indefinitely. To this day, she remains the youngest ever female killer convicted in the UK. There remains some disquiet amongst the legal community that perhaps Norma should have been convicted also. Despite her mental deficiencies, the fact remains that eyewitness accounts put Norma as the one who was seen strangling other children, and that she should have been held equally culpable as Mary, given that the two were inseparable, doing damn near everything together, so why not murder too? Again, discuss below. On the inside and release. During her time on remand, Mary was held at both Durham and South Norwood detention homes, but on her conviction she was transferred to Newton Llewellows on Merseyside at a young offenders institute called Red Bank Secure Unit, being the only female inmate of 24. Mary would later allege that she had been sexually abused at this institute by both staff and inmate alike from the age of 13. After she had turned 16, she was transferred to the now defunct HMP Style, a prison for female adults in Cheshire, in November of 1973. From here, she applied for parole, but was rejected. Another change of location came in June 1976 when she was moved to an open prison called Moor Court, a now closed facility in Staffordshire. However, this move would be short-sighted, as in September of the following year, she and another inmate named Annette Priest failed to return to the prison at the mandated time of curfew. The pair fled to Blackpool, where they spent several days at a few different bed and breakfast hotels, Bell using the pseudonym of Mary Robinson. They hung around in the presence of a couple of men and wandered around the many amusement arcades of the coastal resort, after which the two women went their own separate ways. Mary was eventually apprehended a few days later after her absconding in the home of one of the men that they were hanging around with, named Clive Shirtcliffe, all the way down in Derbyshire. She had dyed her naturally brown hair blonde to disguise herself to the casual observer. Annette Priest was rearrested a couple of days later at a home in Leeds. Rather laughingly, Mary's punishment for doing one from the authorities was a staggering 28 days loss of privileges, meaning essentially confined to her cell. In the June of 1979, she was again transferred, this time to Ascombe Grange near York, another open prison for women. This was in a bid to prepare her for eventual release. She had been undertaking a secretarial course and worked as a waitress in the cafe of York Minster, where a small number of people recognised her. Some members of my own family, being in North Yorkshire Police, were well aware of her presence about town. Finally, in May of 1980, and after nearly 11.5 years incarcerated, Mary Bell was released from custody under a new name to protect her from would-be vigilantes. 4 years after her release, Mary gave birth to a daughter, so obviously she had managed to find herself a partner as well. Since then, the now 68-year-old Mary, or whatever name she goes by these days, has kept a low profile and thankfully out of trouble. Her current whereabouts are unknown, but that is for the best for her own safety. Certainly, despite her new identity, she and her daughter have had to relocate at least once in the prevailing years due to their whereabouts becoming public knowledge. A biography of Bell was written by Gita Serini in collaboration with Mary herself to tell her side of the tale, titled Cries Unheard, The Story of Mary Bell. Interestingly, unlike some killers who choose to tell their story, Mary does not attempt to minimize her role and does not contest her conviction. She also is clear that her upbringing was not an excuse for what she did, which is quite a refreshing outlook in all honesty. It is available on Amazon should you wish to read it for yourself, link in the description, and no, it is not an affiliate link. In the May of 2003, she won a court case that granted her and her daughter lifelong anonymity for their protection, and even further updated later to include her granddaughter, who was born in January of 2009. This makes it illegal to publish anything which could potentially identify the three or their whereabouts, including their assumed names. Legacy. It is interesting that females generally don't tend to become repeat murderers, more of a one-and-done situation. But make no mistake, the fairer sex is more than capable of the most horrific acts, and as this case has shown us, age is no barrier. Certainly as a child, Mary Bell was a true psychopath, unfeeling in her actions and lacking the slightest ounce of remorse. She preyed upon those younger and weaker than herself so she could live out her fantasies of murder. One can argue that her environment made her into what she was, and whilst that is a valid point, it doesn't automatically grant carte blanche to do whatever you like. Her violent nature forced nearly everyone away from her, but when she found someone who was willing to toe the line in Norma, she manipulated her into becoming her accomplice. Thankfully, the law recognized this and forgave Norma as a kind of victim in her own right, easily led and bent to accompany Mary on her roller coaster ride to hell. Mary's twisted psyche made her impulsive, with no internal sense of conscientiousness, meaning that she would act on her initial thoughts without stopping to realize the implications, as you or I would. She simply did not have that little voice in her head that prevents her from doing bad things. I believe that this means she experienced traits of both antisocial and narcissistic personality disorders, perhaps even more than that if she had had her freedom through the rest of her formative years. Whilst I am highly skeptical that such a person could be cured, I do hope that it is true in this case, especially given her freedom and new identity. Let us all pray that she never decides to indulge in her old habits, and that the souls of her two victims, Martin Brown and Brian Howe, both rest in everlasting peace. Thank you for watching this video. I do hope you found it informative and interesting. If you did, please hit the like button and subscribe to DID for many more great deep dive video documentaries like this one. I know many of you have been requesting this one for a while, so I hope I scratch the itch for you all. What do you think of Mary Bell? Do you think she was pure evil, or do you think she was the victim of her upbringing? Or something else? Let me know in the comments below. Past experience has shown me that I can always rely on my audience to present new ways of looking at things that I had not previously considered, so it is always welcomed. If you wish to do so, you can support DID on Patreon or by becoming a member right here on YouTube to get early access to all my new videos as soon as I upload them. Or if you wish to give a one-off donation, you can do so by the Super Thanks button to show your support. And don't forget my merch store on Teespring, when you can grab yourself some DID swag to show everyone that you are one of the Dark Legion. And if you prefer something much safer for work, check out my alternate channel DID Reads, where I post things like famous speeches, short stories, poetry, and even children's stories, because why should the kiddies miss out on a bit of DID? And in the meantime, take care of yourselves, and I shall see you on our next descent into darkness.